I sit in my car in the darkness, engine off, watching the digital clock on my dashboard tick from 1:42 to 1:43 in the morning. The office building looms ahead of me, its windows black and empty, nothing like the warm glow that spilled from the rooftop just hours ago. My tuxedo jacket lies crumpled on the passenger seat where I threw it when I finally escaped. The bow tie I spent 20 minutes getting right now hanging loose around my neck like a noose I can't quite remove. My phone rests in my palm, screen dim, and I know I shouldn't do this to myself again. But my thumb moves without permission, finding the voicemail I've kept for 2 months now, the one I play when the silence in my townhouse becomes too heavy to bear. I press play and close my eyes as his voice fills the small space of my Honda Civic. The message is barely coherent, whispered and wine-soaked from some late night I'll never know about. He says my name like it means something, like it's a secret he's not supposed to know. The words blur together, but I've memorized every pause, every breath. When it ends, I press repeat. I always press repeat. Earlier tonight, I stood on that rooftop 30 floors above the city, holding a ginger ale I didn't want, wearing a rented tuxedo that made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The holiday party hummed around me with the kind of forced cheer that comes when a company tries too hard to prove its employees are a family. Jazz drifted from hidden speakers, something slow and melancholy that made the December air feel heavier than it should have. I'd positioned myself by the railing, far enough from the clusters of conversation that no one would feel obligated to include me. This was my strategy at these events. Appear present, smile when spoken to, leave as soon as politeness allowed. I watched my coworkers dance, their faces flushed with wine and the relief of another year survived. Couples swayed together, while singles paired off with the easy confidence of people who knew they belonged somewhere. That's when Julian found me. I saw him approaching through the crowd, moving with that effortless grace he carried even in meetings about quarterly reports. His bow tie was already undone, hanging around his collar like he'd been at this party longer than the 2 hours I'd been counting. His hair, usually so carefully styled, had fallen across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, less like the team lead who defended my ideas in conference rooms, and more like someone I might have known in another life. He said he couldn't let me leave without a dance. Not a question, not really, though his voice carried that gentle insistence I'd come to recognize over the past year of working together. Before I could protest, before I could remind him that I don't dance, that I especially don't dance at company functions where everyone can see, his hand was already reaching for mine. The first few seconds were awkward. My feet didn't know where to go, my hand uncertain in his. But Julian moved like music itself, and somehow my body remembered rhythms I thought I'd forgotten. The chatter around us faded to white noise. The lights of the city spread below us like fallen stars, but all I could focus on was the warmth of his palm against mine, the subtle cologne that mixed cedar with something I couldn't name, the way his eyes never left my face even when I looked away. We weren't making a spectacle, just two men in white shirts and dark pants, swaying to music that seemed written for this exact moment. If anyone noticed, they probably saw nothing more than colleagues sharing a friendly dance at the end of a long year. But inside my chest, something I'd spent decades keeping perfectly still began to wake up. When the song ended, when the last notes faded into the December night, Julian didn't step back. His hand remained at my waist, his body close enough that I could feel the heat radiating through his shirt. His mouth was inches from my ear when he spoke, his voice so low it was almost lost in the wind that swept across the rooftop. He said something I'll never forget, something that reached through all my careful defenses and found the part of me I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist. His breath was warm against my neck, his words barely audible, but clear enough to shatter the perfect order I'd built my life around. Now I sit in this car, in this darkness, replaying his voicemail for the 100th time since he left it on some midnight I wasn't there to answer. My hands shake as I lower the phone, as I stare at the building where everything changed. I whisper the words I've been saying to myself for hours, the lie I keep trying to make true. It was just one dance. But even as I say it, Even as I start my engine and prepare to drive home to my empty house and my silent rooms, I know that nothing will ever be just anything again. One dance was all it took to wake up a heart I'd thought was safely sleeping, to remind me that 43 years old isn't too late to discover you've been living someone else's life. The clock turns to 1:44, and I finally put the car in drive, carrying Julian's voice and the memory of his hand on my waist into a night that feels nothing like the mornings I've been waking up to for years. The drive home takes me through neighborhoods I've memorized over the past 8 years, past the same traffic lights and strip malls that mark the boundaries of my carefully constructed life. My townhouse sits at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Philadelphia, indistinguishable from the dozen others that share its brick facade and small front garden. When I bought it after the divorce, I told myself it was temporary, a place to regroup before figuring out what came next. That was nearly a decade ago. I am Malcolm Dade, 43 years old, and I have become a man defined by his routines. I wake at 6:15 every morning, make coffee in the same blue mug, eat toast cut diagonally while listening to the local news. I shower, dress in one of 7 nearly identical button-down shirts, and arrive at the office by 8:30. I am the senior financial analyst who never misses deadlines, who stays late without being asked, who remembers every colleague's birthday and keeps a mental catalog of their children's names and ages. At work, they call me dependable, reliable Malcolm, who can be counted on to double-check the numbers, to catch the errors others miss, to volunteer for the projects no one else wants. I've been with the firm for 12 years now, long enough to have trained 3 different generations of junior analysts, long enough to have my own office with a window that looks out onto the parking garage. It's not a corner office, but it's mine, and I've filled it with the same careful neutrality that defines the rest of my existence. My coworkers like me, or at least they seem to. I'm invited to birthday lunches and retirement parties, included in the group emails about weekend plans I never join. They know I was married once, that it ended amicably, that I live alone now. They don't know about the years of therapy, the careful reconstruction of a life that imploded when I was 34 and finally admitted to myself what I'd been running from since high school. They don't know about the nights I spent driving past bars I was too afraid to enter, or the dating apps I downloaded and deleted without ever creating a profile. What they know is that Malcolm shows up, does the work, goes home. He's pleasant in meetings, helpful with difficult clients, the kind of employee who makes everyone else's job a little easier. He doesn't talk about his personal life, but he listens when others share theirs. He's safe, harmless, invisible in all the ways that matter. My house reflects this same studied invisibility. The living room centers around a burgundy armchair I bought from the previous owner and have never moved, positioned to face a television I rarely watch. The blinds haven't been changed since I moved in, vertical slats in beige that filter the afternoon light into thin, parallel lines across hardwood floors that echo with every footstep. Classical music plays most evenings, Chopin and Bach spinning on the record player I inherited from my father, filling the silence while I eat microwave dinners at a kitchen table set for one. There are no photographs anywhere in the house. No family portraits on the mantle, no vacation snapshots on the refrigerator, no evidence of the marriage that lasted 6 years, or the parents I call every Sunday from the same spot on my couch. If someone walked through these rooms, they might think I'd just moved in, or that I was preparing to leave. The truth is simpler and more complicated. I've never learned how to live in a space that feels like home. This is the life I built after everything fell apart, and for years it felt like enough. Predictable. Safe. A life where nothing unexpected could reach me, where I controlled every variable and planned for every contingency. I told myself I was content, that contentment was a reasonable goal for a man like me, that wanting more was the kind of thinking that had gotten me into trouble before. Then Julian Van Holt joined our team. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, 15 months ago now, walking into our conference room with the kind of easy confidence I'd never possessed. 39 years old, married to a woman named Vanessa who teaches 2nd grade, father to twin boys who play soccer and take piano lessons. The kind of man who shows family photos without being asked, who knows everyone's names by the end of his first week, who somehow makes even budget meetings feel warmer just by being there. Julian has a way of touching people's shoulders when he talks to them, of clapping backs and shaking hands with genuine enthusiasm. He remembers details about people's lives, asks follow-up questions about sick parents and college-bound children. Within a month of his arrival, he'd been invited to more social gatherings than I'd attended in my entire tenure at the firm. But he was kind to me too, in ways that felt deliberate. He defended my ideas in meetings when louder voices tried to talk over me. He stopped by my office to ask my opinion on projects, treated my input like it mattered. When I worked late, he'd linger too, asking if I needed help or just wanted company. He noticed when I looked tired, when I seemed stressed about deadlines. Small kindnesses that I told myself were just his nature, the way he treated everyone. I should have known better, should have recognized the signs, should have built better walls. But Julian made it easy to forget why I'd built them in the first place. The holiday party had been approaching for weeks, circled on calendars and discussed in break room conversations I pretended not to overhear. Every year I attended out of obligation, made the minimum required appearance, and left as soon as politeness allowed. This year felt different somehow, though I couldn't name why. Maybe it was the way Julian mentioned it in passing, asked if I was planning to go, seemed genuinely interested in my answer. I pressed my only good suit the night before, the black one I'd worn to my father's funeral and my ex-wife's second wedding. Checked twice that my bow tie was straight, that my shoes were polished, that I looked like someone who belonged at a company celebration. I almost didn't go anyway, stood in my bathroom mirror for 10 minutes trying to convince myself that missing one party wouldn't matter, that no one would notice my absence. But something pulled me there that night, some instinct I'd learned not to trust but couldn't quite ignore. I drove to the office building I knew so well in daylight, took the elevator to floors I'd never seen, and stepped onto that rooftop where the December air carried music and laughter and the possibility of everything changing. I had no idea that Julian had been watching me, waiting for me, planning to ask me to dance. I had no idea that one moment could crack open a life I'd spent years perfecting, could wake up parts of myself I'd convinced I no longer needed. I thought I was safe in my invisibility, protected by my routines and my careful distance from anything that might matter too much. I was wrong about everything. The rooftop transforms into something almost magical under the December sky, string lights casting everything in warm amber, while the city sprawls endlessly below us. Our company has rented the entire top floor of the Meridian building, and someone with better taste than our usual event planners has arranged clusters of cocktail tables around a makeshift dance floor. The bar gleams with bottles I recognize from magazines, but have never tasted, and servers in black uniforms weave through conversations carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I position myself near the eastern railing, far enough from the dense clusters of conversation that I won't be drawn in, close enough to the exit that I can leave without making a scene. The jazz quartet plays from a small stage near the bar, their music floating over the laughter and clinking glasses. I nurse my ginger ale and watch my colleagues transform into different versions of themselves, loosened by wine and the rare permission to be somewhere beautiful. Sarah from accounting has abandoned her usual cardigans for a black dress that makes her look 10 years younger. The partners' wives cluster near the champagne, their jewelry catching the light as they gesture through stories I'm too far away to hear. Even Jenkins from IT managed to find a suit that fits, though his tie already hangs crooked around his neck. I check my watch. 9:47. If I stay until 10:15, I can claim to have made a reasonable appearance. No one will ask why I left early, and tomorrow I can participate in the inevitable post-party recap with enough observed details to prove I was present. This is my plan. This is always my plan. Appear, observe, disappear. Then Julian finds me. I see him before he reaches me, moving through the crowd with that natural ease I've spent 15 months trying not to notice. His tuxedo fits him like it was tailored specifically for his frame, and his bow tie hangs undone around his collar in a way that looks intentional rather than careless. He carries 2 glasses of something amber that reflects the string lights as he approaches. He asks if I'm planning to spend the entire evening hiding by the railing, and his smile takes any sting out of the observation. He offers me one of the glasses, whiskey neat, and I accept it even though I rarely drink anymore. The first sip burns in a way that feels like courage. We stand together watching the party unfold below us, and for a few minutes it feels almost normal, like we're just colleagues sharing a drink and making small talk about quarterly projections. But then the jazz quartet shifts into something slower, something that makes couples drift toward the dance floor, and Julian turns to me with an expression I can't quite read. He says I'm not leaving without a dance, and before I can protest, before I can remind him that I don't dance, especially not here where everyone can see, his hand is already reaching for mine. I want to resist, want to make some excuse about my bad knee or my lack of rhythm, but something in his eyes stops me. Not pleading, exactly, but a kind of gentle insistence that feels impossible to refuse. His palm is warm and slightly calloused in a way I hadn't expected. He leads me toward the edge of the dance floor, not to its center where we might become a spectacle, but to a space where we're just another pair among many. The music washes over us, something slow and unfamiliar that seems written for exactly this moment. The first few seconds are awkward. My feet don't know where to go. My free hand hovers uncertainly until Julian guides it to his shoulder. But he moves with the kind of natural grace that makes dancing look effortless, and somehow my body begins to remember rhythms I thought I'd forgotten. We're not making a show of it, just 2 men in dark suits swaying to music that seems to slow time itself. The chatter around us fades to white noise. The city lights below blur into abstract patterns of gold and white. All I can focus on is the warmth of Julian's hand at my waist, the subtle cologne that mixes cedar with something I still can't name, the way his eyes never leave my face even when I look away. This is dangerous territory, and I know it. I've spent years building walls around moments like this, training myself not to want what I can't have. But Julian moves like music itself, and being this close to him feels like coming home to a place I've never been. We're not making a spectacle. Anyone watching would see nothing more than colleagues sharing a friendly dance, maybe a senior analyst being kind to the team lead who's been nothing but supportive since his arrival. But inside my chest, something I've kept carefully dormant begins to stir. Not just attraction, though that's part of it, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The terrifying possibility that I've been sleepwalking through my own life. The song builds toward its conclusion, but instead of stepping back, instead of returning to the safe distance of professional courtesy, Julian moves closer. His hand tightens slightly at my waist, and I can feel the heat radiating through his shirt. When he speaks, his mouth is close enough to my ear that his breath raises goosebumps along my neck. His voice is barely audible over the music, so low I have to strain to hear him. He asks if I feel it too, this thing that's been building between us in conference rooms and chance encounters in the parking garage. The words land like physical things, heavy and warm and impossible to ignore. I don't answer because I can't, because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that everything I've built my life around is a lie. But my body answers for me. The way I lean infinitesimally closer, the way my hand tightens on his shoulder, the way I don't step back when the music ends and other couples begin to separate. For a moment that stretches like hours, we stand there in full view of our colleagues, of his wife who's laughing with the partner's spouses near the bar, of the life he's built and the life I've hidden from. Then reality crashes back in. Julian steps away, his expression shifting from something unguarded to something careful, professional. He smooths his hair, straightens his shoulders, and transforms back into the man everyone else knows. The team lead, the husband, the father. He thanks me for the dance like it was nothing more than a courtesy, then walks back toward Vanessa, who welcomes him with a smile that suggests she noticed nothing unusual. I remain by the dance floor, watching him rejoin his real life, watching him laugh at something she whispers in his ear. My hands shake as I finish the whiskey he brought me, as I try to convince myself that I imagined the whole thing. that the electricity I felt was one-sided, that the question he whispered was just friendly curiosity. But I can still feel the ghost of his hand at my waist, can still hear his voice asking if I feel it too. And the terrifying truth is that I do. I feel everything I've spent decades trying not to feel, everything I thought I'd successfully buried under years of careful routine and deliberate solitude. I watched Julian dance with his wife, watch him spin her around the makeshift floor with the same grace he showed me, and I understand that my carefully constructed life has just developed a crack that will never fully heal. One dance was all it took to wake up a heart I'd convinced myself was safely sleeping, to remind me that 43 isn't too late to discover you've been living someone else's existence. I finish my drink, check my watch, and realize I can't leave yet. Not when my hands are still trembling, not when the heat of Julian's touch still burns along my ribs. I order another whiskey and find a different corner of the rooftop, somewhere I can watch without being obvious about it, somewhere I can try to make sense of what just happened and what it means for the careful balance I've spent years maintaining. The music continues, couples spin and sway under the string lights, and I stand alone with the knowledge that everything has changed and nothing can ever go back to the way it was before Julian Van Holt asked me to dance. The Monday after the party arrives gray and ordinary, December rain streaking the windows of my office as I try to lose myself in quarterly projections and budget reconciliations. I arrive early, hoping to establish some normalcy before the building fills with colleagues who might remember seeing Julian and me on the dance floor. I tell myself that with enough spreadsheets and enough coffee, I can convince my mind to file that dance away as an aberration, a moment of weakness that meant nothing. For the first few hours, this strategy almost works. Numbers don't lie or complicate themselves with hidden meanings. Revenue is revenue. Expenses are expenses, and profit margins exist in a world where hands don't linger at wastes and whispered questions don't change everything. Then Julian appears in my doorway. He knocks on the frame, even though the door is open, a courtesy that feels both familiar and foreign after Saturday night. He's wearing a navy sweater over khakis, his hair still damp from the morning rain, and he asks if I have a few minutes to discuss the Henderson account. Professional. Normal. Exactly the kind of interaction we've had dozens of times since he joined the team. But when he sits across from my desk, when he leans forward to review the numbers I've prepared, I catch that same cedar scent from his cologne and my concentration dissolves. I find myself watching his hands as he points to line items, remembering how those same fingers felt against my palm. When he asks a question about projected growth, I have to ask him to repeat it because I've been staring at his mouth instead of listening. This becomes the pattern of my days. Julian appears more often now, or maybe I'm just more aware of his presence. He stops by my office with questions that could have been answered in emails. He waits for the same elevator, timing his departures to match mine. In the break room, he lingers while I make coffee, asking casual questions that feel loaded with something neither of us names. He wants to know what music I listen to at home, whether I've read any good books lately, if I ever get lonely working late. Simple questions that colleagues ask each other all the time. But when Julian asks them, his eyes hold mine a moment too long, and I find myself sharing details about my solitary evenings that I've never told anyone. I tell myself I'm imagining it all, that the dance was a moment of holiday spirit, nothing more, and that Julian is simply being friendly the way he is with everyone. He's married. I remind myself during sleepless nights when I replay our conversations. He has 2 children and a wife who teaches 2nd grade, and wears her wedding ring like a promise she intends to keep. Men like Julian don't risk everything for men like me. But then he touches my wrist while passing me a report, his fingers brushing the skin just above my watch, and the contact sends electricity up my arm. When I look up, startled, he doesn't pull away immediately. His hand lingers for 2, maybe 3 seconds longer than necessary, and his expression carries the same unguarded quality it held on the dance floor. Later that same week, I work late on the Morrison audit, the office emptying around me as daylight fades beyond my window. When I finally pack up to leave, I find Julian waiting by his car in the parking garage, keys in hand, but making no move to unlock the door. He says he saw my office light still on and thought I might want company for the walk to the car. It's a 5-story garage with excellent security lighting and emergency phones every 50 feet, but I don't point this out. We walk slowly through the concrete corridors, our footsteps echoing in the empty space, and Julian asks if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. Not with the team, he clarifies, as if reading my confusion. Just the two of us. There's a place near his house that serves excellent espresso, he says, somewhere quiet where we could actually talk without interruption. I should say no. Should make some excuse about my schedule or my preference for the coffee I make at home. Instead, I hear myself saying yes, and Julian's smile transforms his entire face into something younger and more hopeful than I've ever seen. This is how I begin to lose myself. One small yes at a time, one lingering glance, one moment of contact that shouldn't mean anything but somehow means everything. I become obsessed with interpretation, with finding hidden meanings in every interaction. I reread his emails looking for subtext, replay our conversations searching for clues. When he suggests we grab lunch at the sandwich shop across the street, I spend 20 minutes choosing what to wear, as if my choice of time might communicate something I can't say aloud. I feel 22 again, and not in a good way. All the confusion and desperate hope and crushing self-doubt that I thought I'd outgrown comes flooding back. I find myself checking my reflection more often, wondering if Julian sees something worth wanting when he looks at me. I lose weight without trying because food tastes like cardboard when my stomach churns with constant anxiety about what everything means. The coffee date happens on a Thursday afternoon in January. The place Julian chose is small and warm, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, the kind of establishment that exists in neighborhoods I never visit. We sit at a corner table near the window, and for the first few minutes we talk about work, about the office politics and client demands that provide safe common ground. But then Julian asks about my divorce, and something in his voice suggests genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk. I find myself telling him things I've never shared with anyone, about the slow realization that I was living a lie, about the guilt of hurting someone who deserved better than a husband who could never love her the way she needed. Julian listens without judgment, asking follow-up questions that suggest he's actually hearing what I'm saying. When it's his turn to share, he talks about his marriage with a fondness that makes my chest tight with something that might be jealousy. But there's something else there too. A note of wistfulness that I recognize from my own voice when I talk about paths not taken. He says he loves Vanessa, that she's a good mother and a good wife, but sometimes he wonders if he made his choices too young, before he really knew who he was. Our knees bump under the small table, and neither of us moves away. The contact is minimal, just the brush of fabric against fabric, but it feels significant in a way that makes my pulse quicken. Julian doesn't seem to notice. Or maybe he notices and doesn't care, but I become hyper-aware of every point where our bodies occupy the same space. He asks if I ever think about alternative lives, about the version of myself that might exist if I'd made different choices. The question feels dangerous, loaded with implications I'm not ready to examine. I deflect with something about the futility of regret, but Julian shakes his head and says that's not what he means. He means the possibility that we're all more complicated than the lives we've chosen to live. When we leave the coffee shop, Julian walks me to my car, even though his is parked in the opposite direction. The January air is sharp and clean, and our breath makes small clouds as we talk about nothing important. At my car, he pauses with his hand on the driver's side door, as if he wants to say something else but can't find the words. Instead, he tells me he's glad we did this, that he's been wanting to spend time with me outside the office for months. The admission hangs between us like a confession, and I don't know how to respond except to say I'm glad too, which feels inadequate but true. That night, I lie awake replaying every moment of our afternoon together, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meaning. I remember the warmth of his knee against mine, the way he said my name when asking about my marriage, the expression on his face when he talked about wondering who he might have been. I tell myself that friendship is possible, that two adults can enjoy each other's company without it meaning anything complicated or dangerous. But even as I form these rational thoughts, I know I'm lying to myself. Because when Julian asked if I ever think about alternative lives, what I wanted to say was that I think about very little else. That every morning when I wake up in my empty house, every evening when I eat dinner alone, every weekend when I do laundry and grocery shopping, and all the small maintenance tasks that fill a solitary existence, I wonder what it would feel like to live a life that actually belonged to me. And increasingly, when I imagine what that life might look like, Julian is there. February arrives with the kind of bitter cold that makes the city feel abandoned, and I find myself staying later at the office more often, not because the work requires it, but because the alternative is returning to my empty house, where every room echoes with thoughts I'm trying not to think. The building empties by 6 most evenings, leaving just the security guard and the cleaning crew and whoever else finds refuge in fluorescent-lit productivity. It's on one of these late nights, a Thursday when the wind howls against the windows and the parking garage feels like a frozen wasteland, that Julian appears in my doorway carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of something amber from his desk drawer. He doesn't ask if I want company, just sets 1 glass in front of me and pours 2 fingers of what turns out to be excellent scotch. We've been doing this dance for weeks now, these careful approaches disguised as work conversations, these moments of almost intimacy that hover at the edge of something neither of us will name. But tonight feels different. Maybe it's the empty building around us, or the way the storm outside makes the office feel like a shelter we're sharing. But when Julian settles into the chair across from my desk, his usual professional mask seems to slip. He asks about the Richardson report I've been working on, and I show him the projections, but we both know this isn't why he's here. The numbers blur together as we sip whiskey that burns in the best way, and our conversation drifts from quarterly targets to more personal territory. He tells me about his childhood in Vermont, about summers spent at his grandfather's cabin where he learned to fish and split wood and exist without the constant noise of other people's expectations. I share more than I usually do, maybe because of the scotch, or maybe because the building feels like a confessional booth where normal rules don't apply. I tell him about my marriage, about the suffocating weight of living a life that never quite fit, about the relief and terror of finally admitting the truth to myself and watching everything I'd built fall apart. Julian listens with the kind of attention I rarely receive, his eyes never leaving my face even when I look away. When I finish talking, he refills our glasses and asks a question that lands like a physical thing between us. He wants to know if I ever loved someone I shouldn't have. The question hangs in the air while wind rattles the windows and the building settles around us with small creaks and sighs. I know what he's really asking. Know that my answer will change everything between us or nothing at all, depending on his courage and mine. I could deflect, could make some general comment about the complications of the heart, could keep us in the safe territory of hypothetical discussion. Instead, I meet his eyes and tell him yes. The word comes out steadier than I expected, carrying the weight of decades of careful silence. Julian's breath catches, barely audible, but enough to tell me he wasn't expecting honesty. He sets down his glass and leans forward, and for a moment I think he might ask who, might want details about heartbreaks I've never shared with anyone. Instead, he reaches across my desk and covers my hand with his. His palm is warm and slightly rough, and his thumb moves across my knuckles in a gesture so gentle it makes my chest ache. He doesn't speak, but his touch says everything that words would complicate. Recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement that we're both carrying secrets that have shaped us in ways we're only beginning to understand. When he finally pulls his hand away, the absence feels like loss. He tells me he should go, that Vanessa is expecting him, but he makes no move to leave. Instead, he pours more scotch and asks if I ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met at a different time, in different circumstances. The question feels dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might hold our weight or might send us both plunging into depths we're not prepared for. I want to answer honestly, want to tell him that I think about little else, that every interaction we have feels like a glimpse of a life I'll never get to live. Instead, I ask him the same question. Julian considers this for a long time, staring into his glass like it might contain answers to questions he's afraid to ask aloud. When he speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. He says he thinks we would have found each other anyway, that some connections transcend timing and circumstance. This confession hangs between us like a bridge neither of us is ready to cross. The building around us has gone completely quiet except for the storm outside, and I become aware of how alone we are, how far removed from the careful boundaries we maintain during daylight hours. Julian stands and moves around my desk, ostensibly to look at the city lights through my window, but he stops beside my chair instead, close enough that I can smell his cologne, close enough that when I turn to look at him, our faces are only inches apart. He asks if I know what he's thinking, and before I can answer, before I can remind us both of all the reasons this is impossible, he leans down and brushes his lips against mine. It's barely a kiss, more breath and intention than contact, but it sends electricity through my entire body. His mouth is warm and tastes like scotch and something indefinably him. And for one perfect moment, I let myself believe that this is possible, that two people can want each other enough to overcome everything that keeps them apart. Then reality crashes back in. Julian pulls away immediately, his eyes wide with something that looks like panic. He takes several steps back, running his hands through his hair and shaking his head like he's trying to wake up from a dream that's turned into a nightmare. He tells me he didn't mean to do that he doesn't know what he's thinking, that this can't happen. His words tumble over each other in his rush to take back what just occurred, to return us to the safe distance of professional courtesy. He grabs his jacket from the back of the chair and heads for the door, pausing only to look back at me with an expression I can't read. He says he's sorry, though I'm not sure what he's apologizing for, and then he's gone, leaving me alone with the taste of him still on my lips and the echo of his footsteps disappearing down the hallway. I sit in my chair for a long time after he leaves, touching my mouth and trying to make sense of what just happened. The scotch burns differently now, and the storm outside seems less like shelter and more like isolation. I pack up my work slowly, mechanically, but I can't bring myself to leave the building yet. Can't face the drive home, where I'll replay this moment endlessly, searching for clues about what it meant and what happens next. The following days pass in a haze of professional distance that feels like punishment. Julian avoids me completely, taking stairs when I take the elevator, finding excuses to skip meetings where we'd normally work together. When we do cross paths in the hallway or break room, he nods politely and keeps walking, his expression carefully neutral in a way that somehow hurts more than anger would. I tell myself this is for the best, that the kiss was a mistake that could have destroyed both our careers and his marriage. But late at night, alone in my house with classical music playing and microwave dinners growing cold, I touch my lips and remember what it felt like to be wanted by someone I'd convinced myself was impossible to have. By the end of the week, I've decided that I imagined the whole thing, that the combination of scotch and loneliness created a fantasy that felt real in the moment but dissolves under the harsh light of Julian's avoidance. I practice returning to our previous dynamic, prepare myself to accept whatever friendship he's willing to offer while burying everything else so deep it can't surface again. Then, on Friday afternoon, while I'm reviewing budget projections that blur together on my computer screen, my phone buzzes with a text message from a number I recognize but have never seen outside our work email system. The message is brief, just 4 words that make my hands shake as I read them. Can we talk? I stare at the screen until the words burn into my vision, and I realize that nothing is buried as deeply as I thought, that some conversations are inevitable no matter how much we try to avoid them. My finger hovers over the keyboard for several minutes before I type back a single word that feels like stepping off a cliff. Yes. We meet in the parking garage at 6:30, when the building has emptied except for security and the overnight cleaning crew. Julian's car is a silver sedan parked in the far corner where the fluorescent lights create more shadows than illumination. When I approach, he's already sitting behind the wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield like he's watching a movie I can't see. I slide into the passenger seat without speaking, and for several minutes we sit in silence while rain begins to drum against the roof of the car. February rain in Philadelphia is punishing, the kind that soaks through everything and makes the city feel abandoned. The garage amplifies the sound until it's almost deafening, but somehow the noise makes the small space of Julian's car feel more intimate rather than less. He breaks the silence first, his voice barely audible over the rain. He tells me I didn't imagine it, any of it, and the admission lands like a physical thing in the space between us. He says he doesn't know what this is, what we are, that he's never felt this way about a man before. But when he's around me, he says, he feels real in a way he hasn't in years. I listen without speaking because I know that interrupting him now would break whatever courage brought him here. He talks about his marriage, about loving Vanessa, but feeling like he's sleepwalking through a life that belongs to someone else. He describes the weight of expectations, of being the husband and father everyone needs him to be, of smiling and nodding and pretending that contentment is the same thing as happiness. His hands grip the steering wheel like he's trying to anchor himself to something solid. He tells me that our dance at the Christmas party was the first time in years he'd felt fully awake, fully present in a moment that belonged entirely to him. He says he's been thinking about it every day since, about the way it felt to hold me, about the question he whispered in my ear, and the way my body answered even when my voice couldn't. The rain intensifies, turning the world outside his car into abstract shapes and blurred lights. Inside this small space, Julian's confessions fill the air like smoke, making it harder to breathe. When he finally stops talking, when the weight of everything he said settles between us, I find myself asking the question that's been burning in my chest since that night on the rooftop. I ask him what happens when he goes home. Julian's breath catches, and for a moment I think he won't answer. Then he swallows hard and tells me the truth I already know but needed to hear. He says he doesn't want to hurt Vanessa, that he loves her, that she deserves better than a husband who lies awake at night thinking about someone else. But he can't stop thinking about me, he says. He can't stop wanting something he's never allowed himself to want. This confession should feel like victory, like the answer to every prayer I've whispered in the dark corners of my empty house. Instead, it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward will change everything and one step back will preserve the careful balance we've both spent years maintaining. I watch Julian's profile in the dim light from the parking garage, see the tension in his shoulders, and the way he won't meet my eyes. He's asking me to help him make sense of feelings he's never had to navigate, to be complicit in a discovery that could destroy everything he's built his life around. And the terrible truth is that part of me wants to say yes, wants to tell him that we can figure this out together, that love is worth any risk. But I've been where he is now. I've felt the suffocating weight of living a lie, the desperate hope that maybe this time will be different, that maybe I can have what I want without losing everything else. I know how this story ends, and it doesn't end with happiness for anyone involved. I tell him the truth that took me years to learn, the words feeling like glass in my throat. I tell him I've spent decades lying to myself, convincing myself that I could be something I wasn't, that I could want what I was supposed to want instead of what I actually needed. I tell him that those lies poisoned everything they touched, that they hurt everyone who tried to love the person I was pretending to be. Then I look directly at him for the first time since getting in his car, and I tell him not to use me to lie to himself. Julian's face crumples like I've struck him. He starts to protest, to say that this is different, that what we have is real in a way his marriage isn't. And maybe he's right. Maybe what we feel for each other is more honest than anything either of us has experienced. But honesty without courage is just another kind of lie, and I won't be the secret that helps him avoid choosing who he really wants to be. I reach for the door handle, and Julian grabs my wrist. His touch is desperate now, nothing like the gentle contact we've shared in coffee shops and empty offices. He asks me not to go, not to give up on something that could be extraordinary if we just had the courage to pursue it. For a moment, I let myself imagine what he's offering. Stolen moments in empty buildings, careful text messages and lunches that feel like dates, the exquisite torture of loving someone who belongs to someone else. It would be better than the loneliness I've grown accustomed to, better than the silence that fills my house every evening. But it would also be another lie, dressed up in prettier clothes, but still fundamentally dishonest. I pull my hand free and open the door. The rain hits me immediately, soaking through my coat and running down my face like tears I'm too numb to cry. Julian calls my name, but I don't turn around. I walk to my own car through the downpour, my footsteps echoing in the concrete space, and I don't look back even though every instinct tells me to run back to him and say yes to whatever he's offering. At home, I sit at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, trying to write down everything I couldn't say in Julian's car. The letter begins as an explanation, an attempt to make him understand why I had to walk away. But as I write, it becomes something else entirely. A confession about love and shame, about the way one dance can ruin you in the best and worst ways, about the difference between wanting something and being brave enough to have it. I write about the years I spent married to a woman who deserved a husband who could love her completely, about the relief and devastation of finally telling the truth and watching my carefully constructed life fall apart. I write about the loneliness that followed, the way I convinced myself that solitude was safer than the risk of hurting someone else with my honesty. But mostly I write about him, about the way he moves through the world with easy confidence, about his laugh and his kindness, and the way his hand felt at my waist during that one perfect dance. I write about falling in love with someone I can't have, about the exquisite torture of wanting to save him from the same mistakes I made while knowing that salvation has to come from within. When I finish, the legal pad is covered with my careful handwriting, pages and pages of truth I'll never have the courage to speak aloud. I fold the letter carefully and put it in the drawer with my tax documents and insurance papers, buried among the mundane paperwork of a quiet life. I know I'll never send it. Know that Julian needs to figure out who he is without my words complicating his process. But writing it helps me understand something I've been avoiding since that night on the rooftop. I'm not just walking away from Julian. I'm walking away from the possibility of love itself, choosing the familiar pain of loneliness over the terrifying possibility of having something real. The rain continues outside my kitchen window, and I sit in the silence of my empty house, touching my lips where Julian kissed me and wondering if I've just made the bravest decision of my life or the most cowardly. Spring arrives slowly in Philadelphia, winter reluctant to release its grip on the city. By late April, the trees outside my office window have finally begun to show green, and the light that filters through my blinds carries the promise of warmth instead of the harsh glare of snow and ice. I've fallen back into my routines, the careful rhythms that carried me through the years before Julian Van Holt walked into my life and reminded me that I had a heart capable of breaking. Julian left the company in March. A transfer to the Chicago office, he told our colleagues, a promotion too good to pass up. We didn't speak before he left, didn't exchange goodbyes or promises to stay in touch. I heard about his departure from Sarah in accounting, who mentioned it casually while discussing the reorganization of his old projects. I nodded and asked about the transition timeline, my voice steady enough that she didn't notice the way my pen trembled in my hand. His office remained empty for 3 weeks before they assigned it to someone new, and I found myself avoiding that hallway without consciously deciding to do so. The building feels different without him in it, quieter in ways that have nothing to do with sound. But different isn't necessarily worse, I've discovered. Different can also mean peaceful. On a Saturday in early May, I take a walk through Center City, something I rarely do but feel compelled toward by the unseasonably warm weather and the restlessness that comes with too many weekends spent alone in my house. The streets bustle with the kind of energy that emerges when winter finally breaks, couples walking hand in hand, families pushing strollers, the outdoor cafes beginning to set up their sidewalk tables. I pass a small wedding venue, the kind of converted brownstone that specializes in intimate ceremonies, and through the tall windows I can see the aftermath of what must have been an afternoon celebration. Tables covered in white cloth, flowers scattered across hardwood floors, and near the windows, a small group of guests still lingering over champagne and conversation. But what stops me, what makes me pause on the sidewalk like I've been struck by something physical, is the sight of two men dancing slowly in the center of the room. They're both in their 30s, both wearing dark suits, and they move together with the kind of easy intimacy that speaks of years rather than moments. One has his head resting on the other's shoulder, and they sway to music I can't hear through the glass, lost in their own private world while friends and family watch with the kind of smile that suggests this moment has been a long time coming. I stand there watching them for several minutes, these strangers celebrating a love they were brave enough to claim, and I feel something I haven't experienced since that night in Julian's car. Not envy, exactly, though there's some of that. Not regret, though that's present too. What I feel is something closer to recognition, the acknowledgement that love exists in the world in forms I've never allowed myself to imagine. Walking home, I think about choices and timing, about the difference between wanting something and being ready for it. Those men in the wedding venue found each other when they were prepared to be found, when they had the courage to build a life together instead of stealing moments from lives that belonged to other people. I wasn't ready for that when Julian offered it, and maybe he wasn't either, despite his willingness to try. Back in my house, I find myself drawn to my phone, to the voicemail I've kept like a talisman for months now. Julian's voice, thick with wine and longing, whispering words I've memorized but never fully believed. He says my name like a prayer, like a secret he's afraid to speak aloud. He tells me he wishes he'd met me first, before Vanessa, before the children, before the life that made choosing me impossible. I've played this message so many times that I know exactly when his breath catches, exactly how long the pause lasts before he says goodbye. It's become a ritual, this late-night communion with a ghost of possibility, a way of keeping alive something that was never really mine to begin with. But tonight, listening to Julian's voice in the quiet of my living room, I hear something different. Not the promise I used to cling to, but the pain of someone trapped between who he is and who he thinks he should be. Someone who called me in a moment of weakness because he knew I would understand what it feels like to live a lie, but who wasn't ready to stop living it. I delete the voicemail. The action is surprisingly simple, just a few taps on my phone screen, but it feels momentous in the way that small gestures sometimes do. When it's gone, when Julian's voice no longer exists in my pocket waiting to be summoned, I expect to feel loss. Instead, I feel something lighter, something that might be relief. I go to my living room window, the one that faces east toward the city, and open it for the first time since moving into this house. The evening air carries the scent of flowering trees and the distant sounds of neighbors returning home from dinner, from movies, from all the small adventures that make up a Saturday night in spring. I breathe deeply and realize that the silence in my house sounds different now. Not empty, exactly, but expectant, like a life waiting to be lived instead of a life being endured. I think about the men I saw dancing, about the courage it takes to love openly, about the possibility that 43 isn't too old to learn new ways of being in the world. Tomorrow I'll call my parents, maybe suggest a visit instead of our usual Sunday phone call. Next weekend, I might explore more of the city, find new coffee shops and bookstores, places where I can practice being someone other than the invisible man I've trained myself to be. Small steps toward a life that belongs to me rather than to the careful construction of safety I've mistaken for living. The breeze moves through my house, stirring papers on my kitchen table, carrying away the stale air of a life lived too carefully. I stand at the open window until the streetlights come on, until the city settles into its evening rhythms, and I no longer feel like I'm watching life from the outside. Julian was right about one thing: timing matters, but not in the way he meant. The right time isn't when we want something badly enough to risk everything for it. The right time is when we're ready to stop hiding from ourselves, when we're brave enough to live honestly even if it means living alone. I close the window eventually, but I don't lock it. Tomorrow I'll open it again, and maybe the day after that. Small acts of courage, small gestures toward a life lived with the windows open instead of the blinds drawn. It's not the love story I thought I wanted, but it's the beginning of something that might be better. The story of learning to love the life I actually have instead of mourning the one I think I should want. The silence in my house feels different now. like a life that finally belongs to me.